Good morning, everybody. Robert Phoenix here, back again. It's Thursday, and it is the 13th, Thursday the 13th, and tomorrow is Valentine's Day. I hope that you are, at the very least, treating your own heart decent and well, and perhaps that of another or special other with another Hallmark holiday. Anyway, it is the 15 minutes of flame hour, your morning cup of reality. I'm here to talk to you about some of the upcoming or some of the events of the day that are happening right now that you need to pay attention to and be aware of, because we're in a very interesting time in terms of the China crisis, the Corona crisis. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that have recently come across my screen and share those with you. Some of which are quite alarming, and we'll have to kind of extrapolate where we go from this place, right? Um, and then the other thing that I wanted to talk about today is there are two interesting articles that that came to me from different directions. One was sent to me by Uncle Glenn from the chat. Thank you, Uncle Glenn. I appreciate that. And I wanted to talk about that article that he sent me. And I also wanted to talk about another article that came from a different direction. And they both are sort of focused and centered around the same idea of the quote unquote common man, and the what happened to the quote unquote common man, and how this thing could and will likely shake out, and some of the social repercussions. And it's a really, really big 40,000-foot view. This we're starting to see the, how do I say this, the distended, the absolutely distended and diseased parts of them that are rearing their ugly head. And it really has a lot to do with China and some of the stuff I'm going to share with you about China. Let me get in and let me check in with you guys on the YouTube side. Of course, the man is here. He got in early today. Here he is. Look at that. Psychedelic cat. That's where it's at. It's Jasper. He got in early. He's like, okay, you haven't even started the show. I'm going to be right there with you today, start to finish. Let's see who's in the chat room here. We got Isla, and then there's JMP. Hey, JMP. And there's Judy, Fup, Diana. Diana's dancing. All right. I like the dancing part. What are you dancing to, Diana? What are you dancing to? Let's see. Who else do we have here? We got Charles. Hey, there's Charles. Nice to see you. Good morning, sunshine. Back. Ian. Hello, Ian. Maury. Lots of snow in Ohio. You're in Ohio. We're going to talk about. Oh, Maury's not in Ohio. He's talking about Gandalf. Gandalf is Maury's familiar. Let's see. Snow in Ohio. School canceled. There's Joan. Hi, Joan. And there's our good friend at the Association of Metaphysical Stores. And that's Miss McKeon. What's going on? And let's see. We have Carrie Rose and Sandy, and usually Higher Love. See, I love that song. I love Higher Love by Steve Winwood. Isn't that just a great uplifting tune? I saw Steve Winwood on that tour, by the way. Great show. Absolutely great show. Fantastic show. Level 42 open for them. I remember most of my concert dates. Believe it or not, people I've seen, even the opening acts. We're feeling very digitized today. Something is going on with the connection here. I'm feeling very max headroomy. I'm gonna have to remedy that. Let me see how I can do this. Give me 1 second here. I'm gonna try to change this up so we have a better stream. In the meantime, I hope Jasper doesn't destroy the set. Give me 1 second. So how was Jasper as a guest host? Sorry about that. I'm having some issues today with the signal, and I can't really address it now. So I'll have to wait till tomorrow. I apologize for that. And Jasper did completely wreck the set while I was away, didn't he? All right, let's just carry on here, and try to make the best of the weird digitization and latency. So I wanted to share a post about what's going on in China, and I found this morning, and I think it's really worth noting here. And I will put the link to this, but you're going to have to do a Google Translate on it. That's important to be able to digest this thing. Give me 1 second here. And again, I apologize for the weird digitization. It's like, whatever. It's the modern world. At least we get to do this, right? Okay, here we go. All righty, let's do this in 1, 2, 3. It's interesting. I mean, I think Jasper is actually here to... I think Jasper's a spy. He's here to infiltrate my show and then make things difficult for me. That's what I think. It all looks like it's all lovey-dovey, but you know, he is chipped. So who knows what's going on? Maybe the signal from the chip is going to go up there. Go up onto his podium now. That's it. And start making everything yours. Okay, here's the headline, boys and girls. This is from a Chinese website called Yangtze. So this is serious stuff now. The Beijing CDC Party Committee issues wartime status order. So now this is not just the local police, the constabulary, the goons in masks that are picking people off the street or pulling them out of their cars or locking them into their houses. Now the army has been engaged here in China. So the English is a little stilted. Let me go through and read this. Party Committee of Beijing Centers for Disease Control, in order to further discipline, compact responsibility, and ensure that all prevention and control work is carried out in an efficient and standardized manner, the Party Committee of the Beijing Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued a wartime state order requiring its party members and employees to fully recognize the critical period, critical moment, and keys the urgency and importance of the moment, consciously established a very conscious and entered a wartime state. Now remember, this is a translation, so some of the English be a little funky. This is the first is to insist on using state of war to lead the thinking. The center not only fulfills the city's epidemic prevention, so this is Beijing, one of the biggest cities, I think it might even be the biggest city in the world. It's right up there with Mexico City, Tokyo, New York, London. The city's epidemic prevention and control duties provide professional technical support duties for government decision-making, but also implements the unit responsibility of the quartet responsibility to protect the safety and health of all employees, both of which are equally important and cannot be sidelined under the unified leadership of the party committee. It unconditionally obeys the decision-making and deployment of the party in the wartime state and serves the current prevention and control work. It resonates at the same frequency, obeys unified orders, unified commands, and acts. The second is to insist on strengthening implementation with wartime standards. All party members and cadres must take overall consideration into account and resolutely put an end to work mistakes caused by this mistake. All employees must unconditionally obey work scheduling and consciously obey management. Okay, so this is a very interesting statement. And I just want to stop right here, right there. Because last night I was listening to Steve Bannon, and Steve Bannon had a couple of guests on, Mark Hatfield, who is a quote unquote expert, right? He's an expert. He basically wrote a book that is the, how do I say this? The scientific and research version of The Stand. This is Mark Hatfield. He was on Banish. He didn't say a lot last night, but what he did say was rather important. And then there was another woman named Rosemary Gibson, who I'm going to talk about, and what she had to say, which I think is critically important here. Now, what this statement refers to is the fact that China is at a major crossroads and crisis. Their entire economy could ultimately collapse if they can't get back to full-scale production within 60 days. You're going to see what will happen to the Chinese with this would be the equivalent of a 10.0 Richter scale earthquake, basically cratering and splitting the country in two. That's what we're talking about here. So this statement is referencing what they were talking about, what Mark Hatfield and what Steve Bannon were talking about last night, which is that they are now forcing people to go back to work. It's a very strange thing, right? So they've got to quarantine people, and they have to make sure that their productivity can sustain itself, so that they're just not completely cratered. So some people may not want to go back to work. There are people that might say, hey, look, you're putting me to work here. I'm not so well. This guy over here might not be well. But this is what all employees must unconditionally obey work scheduling and consciously obey management. That's it. They're gonna force people to return to work where they need them to be engaged. I don't know if this is a great strategy, but this is what's happening. Strengthen the work style and achieve the end of the day. At the end of the day, adhere to the problem-oriented, responsibility-oriented, sensitive matters in the prevention and control unexplained events and the work of leaders at all levels to understand the situation at the grassroots level and guide commence to work. And there's a nice little unified symbol there. Minimize cross-contact. During the epidemic, all staff members are strictly prohibited from leaving Beijing. How about that? Strictly commuting to work, eating out, and consciously doing good health management after work. The security section should strengthen the access control of the 3 courtyards and strictly control the entrance and exit of the gates and all foreign personnel. You can't leave Beijing now. You're locked in. You're locked down. All personnel enter the hospital area for temperature monitoring and must enter the hospital with work cards to reduce unnecessary travel during work. Non-work must not be connected to the department. Try to use the phone or WeChat, SMS, and other means of communication. Try to have as few meetings and short meetings as possible to control the number of participants. The fourth is to insist on strict management with wartime thinking. Highlight political security, ideological security, network information security, security of confidential work, laboratory biological security, food security. The epidemic data collection, statistics, and reporting will be done well. And information security and confidentiality security incidents will be resolutely prevented. Frontline personnel engaged in flow regulation, pathogen inspection, and close management should strictly implement prevention and control guidelines and operating specifications. Do a good job of personal protection requirements and ensure personal safety. Strengthen laboratory management and resolutely put an end to the theft, leakage, and loss of pathogenic bacteria in various samples. Wow. So we must adhere to war discipline and take it seriously. So essentially, rounding this all up, this is a declaration of war. They have declared war on the coronavirus. This is what's happening. They've declared war on the coronavirus, and they have implemented martial law in Beijing. Plain and simple. And if it's martial law in Beijing, you're going to see martial law all across China. Now, one could make a
one could make a statement that it's too little, too late for all the people that have actually fled China. We've got 91 Chinese nationals or people that will travel to China locked up in a quarantine zone at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. We got 91 people, and they've been hanging out there. They're going to be there for 2 weeks. Now, I don't think 2 weeks is probably sufficient enough, but this is a big problem, and they still continue to fly people in from China, which blows my mind. Like there was another corona case that popped up in Hawaii. Somebody who was traveling from China got to Hawaii. Last night on the War Room with Bannon, they were talking about how millionaires and billionaires have been leaving. They're leaving China in droves. And a lot of them are leaving via boats. So they have their offshore strategy in place. So what they're doing is they're taking as many of their assets as they possibly can, either physical, of course, maybe digital, unless the Chinese government will seize them. And then they're basically hanging out on these boats and quarantining themselves on their own private boats. And once them should have been quarantined, and if they're okay, theoretically, they will set sail and they'll go to another country, maybe somewhere in the South Pacific, and maybe from there they'll try to land in Los Angeles or try to land in Vancouver, because we've stopped flights like American Airlines, I believe Delta and United have all stopped flights coming in from Hong Kong or Beijing or anywhere to Shanghai or anywhere they do service with China. But that doesn't mean that they've stopped flights from Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, even South Korea. There's no flight stoppage there. So those countries would be landing spots for the people that are getting off the mainland and have the money and the assets and the wherewithal to be able to do that. So that's what's happening now, and things are starting to ratchet up here in a pretty significant way. So last night on the War Room, Bannon had this woman named Rosemary Gibson, and she did a book. It's called China's RX, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And the book was the result of 3 years worth of research. Now, this is somebody who has done work with the Hastings Institute. I mean, she's a high-level researcher. And anybody that works with institutes, you kind of have to look at them sideways a little bit, because you never know what's going on. But her work seems quite legit and very thorough. And after 3 years of research, what she figured out is that the generic drug trade is being locked down by China. Like, they have everything. They have everything. And not just for the United States, for Western Europe as well. When I say everything, I mean everything. They have the starters for these drugs that people, theoretically need, including antibiotics. It's huge. So we don't even have the starters anymore to create a lot of these drugs. So this is a real problem. This is a very significant problem for people that are unfortunately hooked into the medical industry and have to take prescription drugs. There could be about a 2-month supply of prescription drugs. And what happens if that runs out? Well, we're if this thing continues to accelerate the way it is, especially in China, we're going to find out. And we're going to find out. And it's really interesting because I brought this up on Facebook last night. And there's a guy who I like, seems to be very aligned kind of spiritually, somewhat politically, with kind of my mindset. And he basically said, "Oh, well, fuck China. We can make our shit here, and we make iPads in Austin." And he's right. I mean, that does happen. And philosophically and morally, I agree with you. I agree with him. But that's not going to solve anything in the interim, because this could have a devastating effect in terms of, let's say, for instance, you are dealing with, you have meds, you're taking meds, you're taking something that was psychotropic drug, and you have to take your psychotropic drug in order for you to maintain your balance and your equilibrium, and however that thing's been set up in its most imperfect form and model in many ways. Well, guess what? You may not be able to get those drugs. What are you going to do? What are these people going to do? It's not going to be easy for them. I can guarantee you that right now. Like, you want to see a bunch of people go through psychotropic withdrawal? Well, first of all, it allows them to function. And again, I'm not a fan of psychotropic drugs. I'm just not. But it's a fact of life that people have been taking them. They do take them. And for whatever reason, whether it's real or placebo, it allows them to function. And if that happens and their supply is cut off, you're going to see a bunch of people go through a world of hurt. And these are people that are supposedly productive, that they're engaged in the workforce at some level. And if they stop showing up, then guess what happens? Or if their performance becomes erratic. I mean, we're really at a very fragile tipping point here. Very fragile tipping point. Now, one could say, well, I hope China gets it together, and I hope that they can figure this out and quarantine these people, and that there are fewer cases of coronavirus being reported, and essentially their slave labor can go back to work and start making our shit. It doesn't solve the long-term issue. It doesn't solve the long-term issue. The long-term issue is that through globalism, we've created a golem, and that golem is China, and now it is loose. It is loose, and it is wreaking havoc on the countryside. It is a Frankenstein monster that is completely mutated. And I'm not even talking about the virus. I'm talking about China as an entity. And it is based on what's happened, it is creating a path of destruction in a lot of ways. But it's okay. I mean, we need to see this. It needs to be visible for people to really understand how we have essentially done a deal with the devil with China. And I've known this for a long time. And I was like, well, what do you do? What do you do? How do you combat this stuff? So my thing is I try to look for products that aren't made in China. Good luck with that. My coffee grinder just went on the fritz about, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago. And I went from coffee grinder to coffee grinder to coffee. Oh, Crops, that's a good German brand. They must be made, this must be made in Germany. No, it's made in China. I found one coffee grinder, one, that was not made in China. And it was from an Italian company. $25. Worth the price, more than likely. Try to find a French press coffee maker not made in China. Almost impossible. Virtually impossible. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And now we're seeing this now. Now we're seeing the wages of globalism come. We're coming face to face with this thing because it's allowed us to have this, you know, how do I say it? You know, strangely inflated lifestyle based on cheap shit and the suppression of wages. There's a price to pay. So this was the article that I wanted to bring in that Uncle Glenn sent me, and this is where we're dealing with the intense, hardcore wages of socialism. I'm sorry, corporatism, globalism. It's a really, really good article. Really good article, and it might stem from the Democratic base or the Democratic mindset. I don't really care, but it's talking about very real issues and things that are swept under the carpet. And this might actually be a truer version of what America really is versus what it's purported to be. Let me do a little more zoom in so you guys can see this. I'll read a little bit of it. Getting rid of Trump means taking seriously shit life syndrome and its resulting misery, which includes suicide, drug overdose death, and trauma for surviving communities. My state of Ohio is home to many shit life syndrome sufferers. In the 2016 presidential election, Hillary Clinton lost Ohio's 18 electoral votes to Trump. She got clobbered by over 400,000 votes, more than 8%. She lost 80 of Ohio's 88 counties. Trump won rural, poorer counties, several by whopping margins. Trump got the shit life syndrome vote. Will Hutton, in his 2018 Guardian piece, the bad news is we're dying early in Britain, and it's all down to shit life syndrome. Describes shit life syndrome in both Britain and the United States. Poor working age Americans of all races, let me just highlight that, all races are locked in a cycle of poverty and neglect amid wider affluence. They are ill-educated and ill-trained. The jobs available are drudge work, paying the minimum wage with minimal or no job security. The Brookings Institute in November 2019 reported 53 million Americans between the age of 18 to 64 account for 44% of all workers, and they qualify as low wage. Their median hourly wages are $10.22. The median annual earnings are about $18,000. For most of these low-wage workers, Hutton notes, finding meaning in life is close to impossible. The struggle to survive commands all intellectual and emotional resources. Yet turn on the TV or visit a middle-class shopping mall and a very different and unattainable world presents itself. Knowing that you are valueless, you resort to drugs, antidepressants, and booze. You eat junk food and watch your ill-treated body balloon. It is not just poverty, but growing relative poverty in an era of rising inequality with all its psychological side effects. That is the killer. Shit life syndrome is not another fictitious illness conjured up by the psychiatric pharmaceutical industry complex to sell psychotropic drugs. It is a reality created by corporatist rulers and their lackey politicians, pretending to care about their minimum wage slave constituents who are trying to survive on 99-cent box macaroni and cheese prepared in carcinogenic water courtesy of DuPont or some other such low-life leviathan. The Cincinnati Enquirer in November 2019 ran the story suicide rate up 45% in Ohio in the last 11 years with a sharper spike among the young. That's a huge number, 45%. That's almost half the freaking population, or theoretical in terms of suicide rate. In Ohio, between 2007 and 2018, the rate of suicide among people 10 to 24 has risen by 56%. The Ohio Department of Health reported that suicide is the leading cause of death among Ohioans ages 10 to 14, and the second leading cause of death among Ohioans between the ages of 15 to 34, with the suicide rate higher in poorer rural communities. Overall, in the United States, suicides have increased most sharply in rural communities, where loss of farming and manufacturing jobs has led to economic declines over the past quarter century. This is according to the APA. The U.S. suicide rate has risen 33%. There's that number, 33. From 1999 through 2017, from 10.5 to 14 suicides per 100,000 people. In addition to an increasing rate of suicide, drug overdose deaths rose in the United States from 16,849 in 1999 to 70,000. Look at that number. That's in 2017. More sharply increasing in recent years. The CDC recently reported that opioids, mainly synthetic opioids made in China, were involved in 47,600 overdose deaths in 2017. 67.8% of all drug overdose deaths. Among all states in 2017, Ohio had the second highest rate of drug overdose death 46.3 per 100,000. West Virginia had the highest rate, 57.8. In 2016, Donald Trump captured 68% of the vote in West Virginia, a state hit hard by opioid overdoses. Begins the NPR story. Analysis finds geographic overlap in opioid use and Trump support. The NPR story was about a study published in JAMA titled Association of Chronic Opioid Use with Presidential Voting Patterns in U.S. Counties. Lead authored by physician James Goodwin. In counties with high rates of opioid use, Trump received 60% of the vote. But Trump only received 39% of the vote in counties with low opioid use. Opioid use is prevalent in poor rural communities. As Goodwin reports in his study, approximately 2/3 of the association between opioid rates and presidential voting was explained by socioeconomic variables. Goodwin said, it very well may be that if you're in a county that is dissolving because of opioids, you're looking around and you're seeing ruin. That can lead to a sense of despair. You want something different. You want radical change. Shit life sufferers are looking for immediate change and are receptive to unconventional politicians. In 2016, Trump understood that being unconventional, including unconventional obnoxiousness, could help ratings. So he began his campaign with unconventional serial humiliations of his fellow Republican candidates to get the nomination. And since then, his unconventionality has been limited only by his lack of creativity, relying mostly on the Roy Cohn model, punch them harder than they punch you, for anyone who disagrees with him. I talked to Trump voters in 2016, and many of them felt that Trump was not a nice person, even a jerk, but their fantasy was that he was one of those rich guys with a big ego who needed to be a hero. Progressives who merely mock this way of thinking rather than create a strategy to deal with it are going to get 4 more years of Trump. The Dems' problem in getting the shit life syndrome vote in 2020 is that none of their potential nominees for president are unconventional. In 2016, Bernie Sanders achieved some degree of unconventionality. His young Sandinistas, I love that. Sandinistas, that's good. Love the idea of a curmudgeon grandfather eccentric uncle who boldly proclaimed in Brooklynese that he was a socialist, and his fans marveled that he was no loser, having in fact charmed Vermonters into electing him to the U.S. Senate. Moreover, during the 2016 primaries, there were folks here in Ohio who ultimately voted for Trump, but who told me that they liked Bernie. Both Sanders and Trump appeared unconventional to them. While Bernie still has fans in 2020, he's done major damage to his unconventionality brand. That is so true. By backing Hillary Clinton in 2016, he resembled every other cowardly politician. I felt sorry for his Sandinistas, heartbroken after their hero Bernie, who for most of his political life had self-identified as an independent and a socialist, became a compliant team member for the corporatist blue team that has spent a career claiming independence. He spent a career claiming independence from. If Bernie was terrified in 2016 of risking Ralph Nader's fate of ostracism for defying the corporatist blue team, would he really risk assassination for defying the rich bastards who own the United States? That was an absolute no. So in 2020, this leaves realistic Dems with one strategy. While the Dems cannot provide a candidate who can viscerally connect with shit life syndrome of sufferers, the Dems can show these victims that they have been used and betrayed by Trump. So the rest of the story gets into essentially how the Democrats can humiliate and shame Trump by showing how he has not lived up to his promises. Like that should really be the big strategy here. And I'm not necessarily interested in the strategy about showing Trump where I think Trump's people on the MAGA side need to be aware of that. But it really illustrates a real problem and a real issue that we are having to deal with. And to deal with it, the issue is that we've had unabated globalism since Reagan got in office. So we're talking 1984, right? When was that, Jesper? Did you hear that pop? 1984. 1984 was when Reagan got in office. Correct? Yes. That's right. Hold on. Let me go back. I got to go back. 1980, right? 1980, 84, and then up to 88. Then after, yeah. My bad. Anyway, we've been dealing with it since Reagan, and it's been unabated. Reagan, G.W. Bush, G.H.W. Bush took it to another level, and then we have Clinton, who basically sold us out, made China most favored nation trading status partner. China admitted to the G20. So now we're dealing with essentially the ravages of globalism. The ravages of globalism. That's what we're dealing with. It's a big deal. We're dealing with, the last, let's see, we got 20, and then since 1980, that's another 20, 40 years. 40 years worth. Now we're seeing the ravages. Now we're seeing the human detritus, the suffering, the breakdown of once thriving communities where people could have actual jobs that can support themselves, have some self-esteem, be able to feed themselves. I mean, this is what we're seeing now. We're seeing the breakdown of this, and it is really painful. It's incredibly painful. And if you look around at who Trump has surrounded himself with and who he's employed, they're all corporatists. They're all corporatists. They're all globalists. People like Wilbur Ross. I mean, it's all about supporting people like Bernie Marcus and Paul Singer, Sheldon Adelson. It's corporate rich and corporate friendly. Do you think that Jared Kushner, who essentially I believe is running the country, do you think he has any clue about how people in Ohio or parts of Missouri or parts of West Virginia or parts of Tennessee or parts of Mississippi are really doing? Do you think they really care? No, they don't. I mean, these are people that are so far removed. Now, I will say this about Trump. He did have to deal with the average guy on these work sites with his construction. So he does know something about that. He does know something about that. But this piece with China and the coronavirus is really illustrating a much deeper issue, a much bigger issue. And that in order for us to succeed, and I mean not just this country, but the world, there's got to be a complete retrofit of how we produce things, where we produce things, and what the emphasis on that production is, and how we can essentially restore some character and self-esteem and hope for people, because it's very painful to watch. It's painful to watch this degradation occur. And the other side of this now, and this is where it gets really cynical, okay? Because corporations know, like they know that part of America is part of an older story. That part of America is being managed out. And so what corporations are doing now is they're courting a new customer base. And they're courting a new client base, and they don't give a shit about that part of America or that part of the story. And this is where the reset comes into play. And again, I clock commercials all the time, and I've seen an uptick in a new level of commercials that, again, I find alarming in a lot of ways. I find quite alarming. I was watching a basketball game the other night, and there was a commercial that Ford had put together. I'm going to try and find it. Maybe I'll bring it up next week. And it was interesting. I mean, they were selling a car, but they weren't really selling a car. The commercial was essentially a room full of so-called Black African American women who had participated on the commercial in various jobs, right, or various positions, stylist, designer. It's all this kind of fashionista sort of fluff, ego puff. It's just touting these almost inconsequential roles. Like they weren't talking about the engineers of the car. They weren't talking about the safety of the car. It was like a freaking you know, it was like a mini Oscars for these women who were somehow involved in this commercial. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, who are they selling this car to and why? I'm watching an NBA game. They're not even selling the car to. It's like, okay, maybe they're not going to sell the car to men. I mean, what about black men? What about a so-called black male? Right? I mean, that's who's playing the game. But that's not what the commercial was about, and it was very confusing. It's like, what are they doing? Like, what is this, and how does it relate to this demographic? And again, the answer that I keep getting is that we're in the process and in the midst of a massive, and I mean a massive reset. And the people in West Virginia, the people in Ohio, the people in Indiana, the people in Mississippi, they don't give a shit. They're going to be expendable. They're not deplorables, they're expendables. And they're going to create a new customer class, and they're going to court them, and they're going to seduce them, and they're going to prop them up. And that is not only the virtue signal, but it's the strategy. It is the strategy for the new world moving forward. And it still will involve globalism and corporatism. That won't change. They'll just spin it, give it a different sheen, and another group will be able to so-called profit from it. That's it. That's it. And it was mind-blowing. It was absolutely, and it's like, what world am I living in? And then I watched the NBA. I'm sorry, now I'm getting into a rant. Then I watched the NBA, and they have like a red carpet now for the guys who are essentially going to the locker room and changing out of their clothes and putting their uniform on. It's a red carpet, and they will actually have video and follow these guys. And for the players, it's become this fashion statement. Bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. Anyway, this all is entangled into this beast, this globalistic beast that we're now having to deal with. Another article came in my direction, and very different. And it's somebody who decided that, they're a lifelong Democrat, and they were hanging out with the MAGA crew, and then they realized that, guess what? They're not as bad as I thought they were. It's pretty recent. I've been a Democrat for 20 years. Here's what I experienced at Trump's rally in New Hampshire. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'll put links up for both of these pieces. Normally, when I publish content online, I focus on the world of work. I hope you'll forgive this brief departure, but I think that those of us on the left need to take a long look in the mirror and have an honest conversation about what's going on. If you had told me 3 years ago that I would ever attend a Donald Trump rally, I would have laughed while assuring you that was never going to happen. Heck, if you had told me I would do 3 months ago, I probably would have done the same thing. So how did I find myself among 11,000 Trump supporters in Manchester, New Hampshire? Believe it or not, it all started with knitting. You might not think of the knitting world as a particularly political community, but you'd be wrong. Many knitters are particularly active in social justice communities and love to discuss the revolutionary role that knitters have played in our culture. As a casual knitter, I never really paid attention to this. I knit as a way to relax and escape the drama of real life, not to further engage with it. But for anyone who is active in the knitting world on Instagram, it became almost impossible to avoid. It started about a year ago when roving gangs of online social justice warriors started going after anyone who was not in lockstep with their ideology. People were bullied and mobbed by hundreds of people for such offenses as publishing an article on expressing excitement about going on a trip to India, posting a video saying they were leaving IG because they were uncomfortable, and posting a poem asking for kindness. Catherine Jepson Moore has documented the full stories extensively in the BBC. So this is gang stalking on Instagram. I started paying attention after one man who was attacked got mobbed so badly that he had a nervous breakdown, was admitted to the hospital on a suicide watch. There was something that was not right. Well, so many things, really. And it witnessing the vitriol coming from those who had aligned myself with politically was a massive wake-up call. You see, I was one of those Democrats who considered anyone who voted for Trump a racist. I thought they were horrible, yes, even deplorable, and had worked very hard to eliminate their voices from my spaces by unfriending or blocking people who spoke about their support of him. However, mine are their comments. I watched a lot of MSNBC, was convinced that everything he had done was horrible, that he hated anyone that wasn't a straight white man, and that he had no redeeming qualities. When I witnessed the amount of hate coming from the left in this small niche knitting community, I started to question everything. I started making a proactive effort to break my echo chamber by listening to voices I thought I would disagree with. I wanted to understand their perspective, believing it would confirm that they were filled with hate for anyone that wasn't like them. That turned out not to be the case. The more voices outside of the left I listened to, the more I realized that these people were not bad people. They were not racist, Nazis, or white supremacists. We had differences of opinion on social and economic issues, but a difference of opinion does not make your opponent inherently evil. And they could justify their opinions using arguments rather than the shouting and ranting I had seen coming from my side of the aisle. I started to discover or rediscover the hashtag walkaway movement. I'd heard about hashtag walkaway when MSNBC told me it was fake and a bunch of Russian bots. But then I started to meet real people who'd been Democrats who'd made the decision to leave because they could not stand the way the left was acting. I watched town halls they held with different minority communities, all available in their entirety on YouTube, and I saw sane, rational discussion from people of all different races, backgrounds, orientations, and experiences. I joined the Facebook group for the community and saw stories popping up daily of people sharing why they were leaving the Democratic Party. This wasn't fake. These people are not Russian bots. And moreover, it felt like a breath of fresh air. There was not universal agreement in this group. Some were Trump supporters, some weren't. But they talked and shared their perspective without shouting or rage or trying to cancel each other. I started to question everything. How many stories had I been told that weren't true? What if my perception of the other side is wrong? How is it possible that the country is really overtly racist? Is it possible that Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing? And I've been suffering from it for the past 3 years. And the biggest question of all this, did I hate Trump so much that I wanted to see my country fail just to spite him and everyone who voted for him? Fast forward to the New Hampshire primary, and we have all the politicians running around the state making their case. I've seen almost every Democratic candidate in person, and almost universally their message is one of doom and gloom, focusing not only on the obvious disagreements with Donald Trump, but also making sure to emphasize that the country is a horribly racist place. Now, I do believe there are very real issues when it comes to race that we as a society have yet to reckon with. I believe that everyone from every background, every gender should have equal access to opportunities, and no one is inherently more or less valuable or worthy than anyone else. And while Charlottesville was a tragedy precipitated by real racists, real Nazis, this is wrong, 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 wrong. Charlottesville was a psychological operation, and it was staged by somebody who was a former Obama supporter who essentially crawled back under the carpet once this thing was over. But with all this, I was still reticent to even consider attending a Trump event. I do not believe that Trump's attitude is worthy of the highest office in the land. I abhor his Twitter. I am vehemently opposed to so many of his policies. But still, I wanted to see for myself. I'm not going to lie. I was nervous. So I thought I'd start my day in familiar territory at an MSNBC live show that was taking place a few blocks away from the rally. I decided to wear my red hat that looks like a Trump hat, but with one small difference. It says "Make speech free again" as my small protest against cancel culture. I even got a photo with MSNBC host Ari Melber while I was wearing it, just for kicks. The funny thing about that hat is that it's completely open to interpretation. When I wear it around left-leaning people, they think I'm talking about the right. When I wear it around right-leaning folks, they think I'm talking about the left. It's really a stark reminder of how much our own perspectives and biases play into how we view the world. And chatting with the folks at the taping, I said casually, I was thinking about going over to the Trump rally. The first reaction they had was a genuine fear for my safety. I'd never seen people I didn't know so passionately urge me to avoid all those people. One woman told me that these people were the lowest of the low. Another man told me that he had gone to one of their rallies in the past and had been the target of harassment by large muscle bound men. Another woman offered me her pepper spray. I assured all that I thought that I'd be fine, but I would get the heck out of Dodge if I got nervous. What they didn't know is that they weren't the only ones I'd heard from that were afraid. Some of my more right-leaning friends online had expressed genuine fear of my going as well, but not because they're afraid of the attendees. They're afraid of people on the left violently attacking the attendees. This was one day after a man had run his car through a Republican voter registration tent in Florida. There was genuine fear that there would be a repeat or that Antifa would bust people up from Boston for it. Just as I assured those on the left, I told them that I thought I would be fine. We didn't really have Antifa in New Hampshire. But I'm not going to say it didn't get to me a bit. When everyone around you is nervous for your safety, it's hard not to question. So I headed over an hour and a half before the doors were scheduled. Okay. As I waited, I chatted with the folks around me. Contrary to all fears expressed, they were so nice. I was not harassed or intimidated. I was never in fear for my safety for even a moment. These were average, everyday people. They were veterans, school teachers, small business owners, and they come from all over the place for the thrill of attending this rally. They were upbeat and excited. In chatting, I even let it slip I was a Democrat. The reaction was, good for you, welcome. Once we got inside, the atmosphere was jubilant. It was more like attending a rock concert than a political rally. People were genuinely enjoying themselves. Some were dancing to the music being played over the loudspeakers. It was so different than any other political event I had ever attended. Even Obama in 2008 didn't feel like this. I'd attended an event with all the Democratic contenders in just 2 days prior in exactly the same arena, and the contrast was stark. First, Trump completely filled the arena all the way up to the top, even with every major Democratic candidate in attendance the other night. The campaigns giving away free tickets, the Democrats did not do that. With Trump, every single person was unified around a singular goal. With the Democrats, the audience booed over candidates they didn't like and got in literal shouting matches with each other. With Trump, there was a generally optimistic view of the future. With Democrats, it was doom and gloom. With Trump, there was a genuine feeling of pride of being an American. With the Democrats, they emphasized that the country was a racist place from top to bottom. Now, Trump is always going to present the best he can, and yes, he lies. This is provable. But the strength of this rally wasn't about the facts and figures. It was about a group of people who felt like they had someone in their corner that would fight for them. Some people say, well, obviously they're having a great time. They're in a cult. I don't think that's true. The reality is that many people I spoke to do disagree with Trump on things. They don't always like his attitude. They wish he wouldn't tweet so much. People who are in cults don't question their leaders. The people I spoke with did. But the pros in their eyes far outweighed the cons. They don't love him because they think he's perfect. They love him despite his flaws because they believe he has their back. As I left the rally, walking by the thousands of people who were watching it on a giant monitor outside of the arena because they couldn't get in, I knew that there was no way Trump was going to lose in November. Absolutely no way. I truly believe that it doesn't matter who the Democrats nominate. Trump is going to trounce them. If you don't believe me, attend one of his rallies and see for yourself. Don't worry, they won't hurt you. Today I voted in the New Hampshire Democratic primary for Pete Buttigieg. I genuinely feel that Pete would be great for this country. Maybe okay, lost me there. So she went through all that, and then she voted for a freaking robot, a Democratic robot. Now, the one thing about Pete is that he's very Obama-like in terms of his appeal. He has a lot of the same people, did the same groundwork, legwork, working for the CIA. Comes from a communist background. He's Obama 2.0 with a bit of a different sheen. Of all the candidates in the Democratic Party, he projects himself to be the most likable, the most kind of middle American because he's so freaking awkward. But our writer there on Medium has a lot more to learn. So where are we now? So we've got this very interesting contrast between shit syndrome, right? Life shit syndrome, which is what's happening in rural America across the country and in other parts of the world. And then you have this enthusiastic throng who are supporting the president, who, for all intents and purposes, continues to tell them that he has their back. He wants to make America great again. And these people have woken up. They've woken up over the last 4 years. And when Trump was running, I was getting a lot of flack because I was not bad mouthing him. And I loved the energy, and I loved the fact that I saw people essentially getting up off their knees and saying, look, we need to be counted. We have a voice. And for me, it was about the energy, and it was about breaking certain constructs. And it was never really about Trump per se, because I actually find him to be quite interesting, but also not very trustworthy, especially with Jared Kushner, just right there on his left shoulder. But we've come to this very interesting crossroads where the real dilemma of globalism and outsourcing and the ravages that it's had on our country and our culture, and the possibility of trying to rebuild that or kind of reconfigure that with a very strong or projected strong political voice and vision. It's going to be interesting to see how this works out and what the reality really is. And if Trump is elected and has another 4 years, that that'll be very interesting if that actually occurs. We're going to see. We're going to see how this thing plays out. We will know the president even more so by the fruits of his labors in the second term, if we get to the second term. And I have my doubts. Because if Trump is elected in the second term, it won't just be Trump. They'll take the House back again. And at that point, if the Democrats have run out of gas, or they've just been told, your role has changed, you can't play that part anymore, we're going to see drastic changes in this country. But I do believe that when 2024 rolls around, that we're going to be looking at a very, very different candidate than Donald John Trump or any of the other Republican candidates that might pop up. Very, very different. If we can get that far. And again, I have some doubts about this whole electoral process coming up. But those two pieces really, to me, exemplify the split and the reality of where we are, and the hope and the promise, and to some degree, even a hint of desperation with where we are. But I'll also say, for people that even have a critical eye and don't agree with Trump on everything, for those people, he's been great for their self-esteem. He's allowed them to feel good about their president and about the country. And is that a bad thing? I don't know. I think it's probably better than people feeling desolate and demoralized. And that's still out there. And that's really what those two pieces are about. The contrast between the jubilance and the energy of the Trump rally and then shit life. And it's the same people in a lot of ways who are part of both worlds. Anyway, we live in interesting times, very, very interesting times. And ultimately, we're in a massive transition. Deconstruction, a lot of chaos, and in a wing and a prayer. Oh, let's see where you guys are. The Trump era is pure mind foolery, the whole nation. There are no positives, no mass arrests of people. Listen, I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I will say this, that Trump has been a catalyst. He's been a catalyst. And I always saw Trump as a catalyst. I didn't see him as the promise or the hope. I saw him as a catalyst. Now, it's what people will do with that energy. That was always going to be the next level for me. Like, what will people do with that energy? Will they try to implement that energy in their own personal life, in their communities. It's about the energy. And I agree with you. There are no mass arrests. And I feel like QAnon's a psychological operation, Project Cicada, right? It's all in there. But you cannot deny the fact that people have been waking up in droves. Now, Trump has kind of left the alt-right behind, and he's moved more towards the center, and even maybe slightly even towards the left a little bit, if you really want to, boil it down. All right, let's see what else we got. See what else is in chat. Who else is in chat? Citronella candles help keep them away. Cedar side. Let's see, Robert, could you post the article on the Dems? I will. Absolutely. I'll post both articles on the show page. Let's see. What else do we have here? The person was still 10 clicks away from being awake. I agree with you, Christine. I agree. But it's a start, right? I mean, it's somebody who crossed the line, who said, I'm going to go into the enemy camp, and I'm going to see what it's about. And it was probably a real revelation. But then she decided to vote for Mayor Robot. When I was in California, I lived not far from Marin County. A lot of my friends are from Marin County. And I've told this story many, many times, but I was shocked when I would talk about people outside of their clique or outside of their kind of perfect new age Marin County vegan, macrobiotic, polyamorous circle. They thought that the rest of the country was some sort of disease and plague riddled redneck zombies, and I always took offense to that. They were so out of touch with the rest of the world, and this is what happened in 2016. The rest of the world said, "Hey, we're still here. We're still here. In fact, we've been here all along." And it was always, to me, it was always disconcerting. Like, if you're that new agey or you're that open, and you have such a broad and universal view, well, why can't you include these people as well? That was one of the decisions. That was one of the factors that helped me leave California. Let's see, what else do we have? Kushner on the left, Ivanka on the right. Javender and Kitty, no poisonous, careful. Read up first. Have a great day, all. Yep. Yeah, I'm going to post the show. Post the links to those two stories that I read and sourced. So I'm out of here too. Thanks, everybody. I'll be back tomorrow with Ra Castaldo, and we'll be looking at practical mysticism, things that you can do in your everyday life to stay in touch with the ineffable, the infinite, the deep spiritual source in your life, and make it work for you on a daily basis. I have been getting some wonderful subscriptions from people. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And it's a real blessing to be able to do this every day and to work with you, and even up the game here, improve the quality of production. I got to deal with this digitization. But if you'd like to subscribe, I'll leave a link also in the show page. And thank you all. Chatlandia, you're the best. I'll be back tomorrow. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. This has been 15 Minutes of Flame.